My name is Melissa Arnoldi. I am the CEO of Vrio, which is a subsidiary of AT&T, and we provide digital entertainment services to 10 million customers in Latin America.
That's awesome, Melissa. Thank you so much for finding time to join us on the AV podcast today. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about your current role, what falls under your purview. But before we do that, give us a little bit of a thumbnail version of your career timeline.
Sure, sure. And first of all, thanks for having me. So I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, one of three kids, and I worked really hard, putting myself really through undergraduate and graduate school. My undergraduate degree was in accounting. I have a master's as well. And soon after I got finished with my graduate degree, I decided that even though I had an undergraduate in accounting, it's not something I wanted to pursue. I wanted, I think, a career that was a little bit more dynamic and challenging. So soon after graduate school, I started with a company called Accenture. And it's a consulting company. And that's really where I got my first foray into technology. What they do when you start with that company is they put you through a boot camp of about 3 or 4 months. And so you learn from the ground up technology development. And for me, that was exciting because it was something very different than a lot of my friends and the path that they were pursuing. I also knew that technology was something that was going to drive innovation. You could just see it by the way it was being used, introduced. And so anyway, I was with Accenture for 12 years and became partner there and had some great experiences.
That's exciting, and thank you for that insight into your career timeline. It seems very diverse and with different backgrounds. So, fast forward to current role. Tell us a little bit more about what falls under your purview.
Sure. So after I was with Accenture, I got a great offer to join AT&T family, and one of my first roles there was to launch the iPhone. So that was over 13 years ago. Very exciting, dynamic product. And while I've been at AT&T for the past 13 years, I've been able to work myself into increasing levels of responsibility. And so my current role now is I lead the Vrio team. And this team is comprised of about 10,000 employees. We support 10 million customers, and we offer video services across these 10 countries. And the video services mainly are satellite type services, and they offer very compelling content. We're great about exclusive sports. We have many local content movies that are made and produced that we also show in these countries. And, we view it as really a company that brings entertainment to everyone, no matter where they live, where they work, because we not only have what we call prepaid and a postpaid service where you can get entertainment in your own home on the big screen TV. We also now have what we call an over-the-top or an OTT product called DirecTV Go. And so now as a customer of Vrio, you can now take that content and enjoy it wherever you are on the small screen. So we've been able to really grow our capabilities in this region, support our customers, and offer them products based on the geographic zone, based on kind of financial situations, and really be able to be there for them when they need us. And particularly in light of the COVID, I would say this past year, it was a service that for them, not only was for entertainment, but was also for education, was also for, how they would stay engaged with the world and understand what was going on around them. So it's become a product that they've really known and enjoyed quite a bit.
Well, that's very exciting, and the project that you led as far as bringing the iPhone to AT&T. Personally, I'm a customer. I'm a customer of AT&T, and heavy user of all of the Apple products. So I'm on that program. So I guess I should thank you for successful launch of that.
Thank you for being a customer.
So now if there's any issues, I know who to call directly.
That's
so, but all jokes aside, from that experience, bringing the, such product as an iPhone to an organization like AT&T, I'm pretty sure it was a monumental endeavor that you guys had to go through. What were some of the lessons learned or some of the key takeaways from that experience that really help you succeed in your current role with the current projects that you're leading?
Well, that's a great question. I have to tell you, it has been the foundation for me, and it's been extremely important because when I first joined AT&T, this was my first responsibility in product. And I didn't know anybody at AT&T. It's a large company. It's growing. It has many lines of business. Very exciting because you have lots of opportunity within the company. But when you're trying to launch a revolutionary product, which by the way, AT&T at the time had the exclusive contract with Apple. So we were the only ones launching it initially. And we had to launch it within months, not years, but within months. And so it was challenging. And so I think very quickly, I learned that I needed a team, and I needed a team of people cross-sectional, from engineers to business analysts to testers to people who are great with communication and writing requirements. And because from the development side, that's where I really led it, working with my business counterparts. But very quickly, you learn you don't have all the answers. This is something that's moving very fast, and it's going to launch whether we're ready or not. So there is no timeline delay. There is no, maybe we can launch part of the product, not all of it. I mean, we were all in. And so we knew that we had to get the right people at the table. We had to make sure that we implemented agile systems so that we could move fast. We really had to be on not 24/7, but a lot of times all day video calls, because, AT&T is in Dallas, and of course, Apple is in Cupertino. And so that alone, the distance, and you have to work very fast and efficient. We knew that we had to be really joined at the hip with Apple. So it was a great experience, but I think some of the major learnings were that you have to collaborate. You have to be willing to get a number of people on your team that think very differently than you, that have different experiences than you, because you're not going to have all the answers. I also think you have to be very transparent with your client, with your customers, with people you're working with on, what's working, what do we have to improve. You've got to drive accountability. And then I think lastly is we had to take risk. And so you had to be a smart risk taker. You could not let fear drive your decision, your intuition, your thoughts. You really had to make sure that you were pushing yourselves and your team as quickly and efficiently as possible, because all expectations were that this product was going to be revolutionary, and of course it was.
Right. Well, that's, what an experience it must have been. And it sounds like you had to build out the entire organization just for that particular initiative from, seems like a full-fledged project management office with the defined methodology on how you guys were running the project, managing the deliverables and the requirements and so forth. So that's, I'm sure we can talk probably the rest of the episode just on that particular topic, but just moving on.
But I was going to say, just right to your point, there was no blueprint. There was no roadmap. This was completely new to the industry, completely new to technology and how we had used phones in the past. So you're right, but it was exciting.
So it was almost a company on its own, where it's a mini, I guess, a startup within the organization that, you had to run. And in my previous life, where I ran project management offices or product management groups within the organization, it was always the concept of kind of that mini CEOs, where you have the product or project managers running their sub projects, and they are responsible from A to Z. And I think that just creates that culture, that environment of innovation, so to say, which leads me to another point that I wanted to talk to you about on some of the strategies or, the practical recommendations that maybe have worked for you well in the past, or something that you learn from when it comes to building and fostering a culture of innovation within your organization or on your teams. Share with us any strategies that really help you build that type of culture.
Yeah, so, the world is changing very quickly, obviously, and a lot of that is because technology is so pervasive. And so everybody now has access to technology, which is great, but it also means there's no one person who's the smartest person in the room anymore, right? Technology really gives us the ability to learn and grow as individuals and as teams. And so I think as part of the speed of technology, innovation is also extremely important. And every company, I think, is either being disrupted or they will be disrupted. There's just no way around it. And so for the teams that I work with in particular, one of the very first things I tell them is that if they're comfortable, if they're not pushing themselves and learning, then they're not striving to the best that they can be. I believe in a continual environment of learning. I think each and every day we should challenge ourselves about what's a new skill set, what's a new way to think, what books are people reading, I think that is extremely important innovation. I also think that you have to have an atmosphere and a culture that allows people to take risk, that allows people to understand that you have each other's back. And you probably are going to fail. But to me, is, if you don't fail, then you're not progressing. We all have ways to learn. The other thing is you have to have a culture of innovation. And what does that mean? I mean, you have to have a culture that will allow people to ask questions, a culture that will disrupt themselves and change their process and procedures to be able to move fast. You also, I think, have to think about data analytics. It's so easy, I think, for us as executive, as leaders, to make decisions based on our experience and based on our intuition. But that's all that is. It's just intuition. And now we have access to so much rich data and patterns of data, what our customers say about our products and services, how they use our products and services. And you can look at that data and come up with some amazing insights about what's working and what's not. And that it's in itself will drive innovation, will drive different thinking, will push yourselves to think creatively. I also think that the way in which you work together as a team from a culture perspective is interesting. And that the same system and processes that if you used 5 years ago, if you're still using them, again, you're not pushing yourselves, you're not being innovative and efficient. And for us, I mean, digital transformation has been huge. And it's one of these journeys that we started a couple of years ago, knowing that, honestly, none of our customers want to call us. Like, they would like to do everything online in the comfort of their own homes that's frictionless. And so when you think about digital transformation, that in itself is something that drives innovation. How you use technology is important. And I think with the pandemic, of course, we saw the acceleration of it. So a lot of times when you think about innovation, it's not only what you're necessarily planning to do, but it's also patterns outside of your control that happen, that you can very quickly think about how can you capitalize on that? How can you drive that for the benefit of your customers, for the benefit of your employees? So I think first and foremost, you have to be transparent, you have to be agile, you have to be able to take risks, and you have to have a continual learning culture to be innovative.
Those are very interesting insights. And I talk to a lot of executives, different companies, different sizes, and a lot when we talk about innovation share very common characteristic that you also talking about, where you almost have to walk that walk, where yes, we can plaster our walls with great mission statements and how innovative we are. But at the end of the day, if you as a leader is, not, walking the walk at the end of the day of what you're preaching, in a sense, yes, the failures are not necessarily failures. Those are actually learning opportunities to take a look at what has gone wrong or what have we learned from that, and leveraging that for any future innovation, initiatives. And also, you touched upon the digital transformation, which is interesting topic on its own, where everything basically starts with people transformation, like you've talked about, that we can innovate and re-engineer or modernize all technology in the world. But if the people are not bought into that vision, it's going to be very challenging to get that type of transformation off the ground. So definitely thank you for sharing some of these insights from that perspective. And as you talk about innovation, and I'm sure you research a lot, you follow different trends, you analyze the markets. From your standpoint, what are some of the different trends and ideas that really excite you these days, whether that's in your industry or maybe outside of that as a personal interest? What are some of the things that you're researching, perhaps looking to invest in further? Share with us from that perspective.
Yeah, well, it does come down to the foundation of technology, which I'm excited to have, a background in and be inspired by the changes in technology. Because of that, industries are completely changing. The lines are being blurred. One company you think is a services company, all of a sudden then becomes a product company that's innovating new technologies and products that you would think that wouldn't even be in their wheelhouse. And so technology has allowed us to really look beyond kind of the borders and the blinders of what we thought was possible. But some of the trends that I'm excited about, as I mentioned earlier, is around data analytics. I think there's so much that you can learn from that data and from the insights that can propel your company forward. So I think that's important. I also think around the cultural transformation. I mean, I know this is more of the softer side, but I think we've learned through the pandemic that leaders who are empathetic, who are humble, who listen to their employees, who listen to their customers, are going to be some of those that win out, because now not only do our customers have choice, but our employees have choice. And sometimes the focus and the importance of where they are from a priority perspective changes within their life. And I guess my point is that you have to understand the culture. You have to be adaptive to the culture based on the circumstances, based on technology, based on really the pressures that are happening not inside the company but outside externally as well. The other thing I think from an innovation perspective and technology that excites me is that you look at companies like fintech companies that are more focused on data analytics, the financials, capital markets, and then all of a sudden, because of technology, they've become a technology company. So I think it's stepping back and looking at companies, looking at industries, and thinking about what if, what can be. Because I just don't think there are limitations that we've had in the past that we will have in the future. And so, again, one of the things I talk to my team about all the time is how can we disrupt ourselves? We can do it ourselves, or somebody else can do it. And so, thinking about how customers use your product, how they can use it differently, how you take that product and then cross into another vertical and another maybe adjacent services or a value added service, and then what type of product do you get them? And so I think you just constantly have to be asking those questions about what are your competitors doing, how can you push yourself to drive innovation.
I love that concept of disrupting yourself. At the end of the day, I think is very powerful, yet oftentimes overlooked. In a sense, people get comfortable, companies get comfortable, or complacent in a sense that we are doing certain things and they're working. So there's really no need to worry about that. But if you build that culture within the DNA of the organization, that you constantly ask yourself that. There's another analogy that I like to use, especially on my teams or everyone, or any of my clients also. From a perspective, and I use that myself on a daily basis, is the acronym WWYRD. It basically stands for what would your replacement do? That if you were in a position and you thinking from a standpoint, if someone else was to come in and do your job today, what would they do? What are the different strategies they would implement that maybe I'm not thinking about? So that's just another kind of supplement towards what you were talking about. So thanks for sharing that. When obviously none of us have the crystal ball, and we all talk about the different dynamics of shaping our organizations, whether that's a hybrid model or continue from a virtual perspective, and the overarching concept of future of work. What are some of the things that's on top of your mind these days as we entering the phase, somewhat of a post-pandemic? How are you preparing your organization for the next period? The reason I'm asking that is because, as through my conversations with a lot of other executives, that topic is very, very interesting for others as well, in terms of what are they doing at this company, what are they doing at that. So anything you can share from that perspective?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, I think when we're in the height of the pandemic in the US last March, I would have said it was incredibly hard to get all of our workers in a remote workforce environment where they were safe but still able to support customers. We were one of the first companies in Latin America that took all of our call center employees and moved them to home. And that was a huge feat in itself, right? Making sure they had access to laptops, to computers, to audiovisual, to making sure we still had secure workspaces, within their home. So that was tough, but I think what's going to be more challenging is then getting the workforce back to the workplace. Obviously, they're all working, but we're all working now in different ways in different environments. And so I think one of the things you have to think about is how do you get back to whatever the new normal will be for your company, but do it in such a way that people can still bring their authentic self to work, do it in such a way that you still provide frameworks of flexibility for your employees. And I think you also have to gradually go back to the workforce, which is what we're starting to do with Vrio and within AT&T. I think it's extremely hard if you think you're going to rip a Band-Aid off and everybody's going to get back to whatever their designation is on, X date. I think it will take time. I think there's a bit of anxiety with going back to the workplace. because people are now comfortable and set up in where they've been in the past 12 to 14 months. So I think it's important that we do it gradually. I think it's important that we have structures and processes that are supporting employees and the well-being of them. A lot of people, thankfully, have been able to focus on their well-being and their family and things that they haven't as much time. And I would like nothing more to continue to be able to support that as a leader, as an executive, and I hope we can still do that for each other. I think the other thing around the fact that we've now been on audio visual calls for over a year, I think is, I know there's burnout that happens with that. At the same time, particularly what I've seen, maybe because I have a company that works across 10 countries, 3 languages, multiple time zones, the video conferencing has been an equalizer. You don't care about roles, you don't care about titles, everybody's engaged. It's something where people feel like they can participate, and it's just because they're not in the room, they're not adding value. And so that's one of the things when I think about return to work that we have to be mindful about is how do you continue to drive collaboration and be an equalizer across your company and make sure that you're really getting the best out of people. But I do think, to your point, there will be a hybrid. There will be some people who will be back in an office because they need to, because of their job and their particular responsibilities. And then others, you need a break. I mean, people want to engage face to face. They're not as necessarily a replacement for face to face. And so that I think makes sense. Other people who we've been able to see, and by the way, I think the pandemic has hopefully clarified this for everybody, particularly for our companies. People are very productive remotely. We weren't sure what would happen. And during a pandemic, I mean, people leaned in. They delivered their results. They exceeded, some of their expectations. And so, I'd like to think that we can give employees the flexibility, whether they work from home or work in the office. I think you have to have a process and structure around it. And I think you have to be patient about how we get these processes back in place and how you get people back to a workplace if that's what they're going to do in the future.
I love what you said from a perspective of being an equalizer, where the organizations who switched to completely virtual, it really flattened the organization from a standpoint of everyone's almost equal. It all, when we all on Zooms, when we're all on these video conference calls, it all boils down to kind of your perspective, what you bring to the table, and how you collaborate with others. So that's a very interesting concept. Thank you for sharing that. When we were talking about your earlier days during your iPhone project for AT&T, one thing you've mentioned is it was a monumental team effort. And obviously, as an executive, as a leader of that project or whatever organization you're currently leading, surrounding yourself with A players, with top candidates is at the top of your mind, whether you're actively recruiting or not. Share with us any strategies that really help you attract the top talent to your teams.
Sure. And you're right. One of the things that I tell people is that I think I've gotten better and better. One of the things I focus on are building high performing teams. Work is too complex and moving too fast paced to think you're going to have it all. And so some of the things that I look for is first and foremost, diverse thoughts. I want people who think differently. I also think that to some degree, you need a disruptor at your table. You need somebody who is going to challenge the status quo, who is going to challenge some of the normal way of doing things. And so I think a disruptor is important. So you have diversity, you have a disruptor. You also have people that, for the most part, I hope are humble and that they understand that they can make mistakes and that there's really nobody who's one smart person in the room. I mean, collectively, the team needs to excel. And that means you need people that think differently, that understand that everyone should be asking questions because nobody has the right answer. But first and foremost, for me, it's got to be a team that works well together. And that means you have to put your own personal ambition, viewpoint to the side and come at it from other people's perspective. So instead of you thinking, okay, here's what we need to do, here's the objective, how can I get the team to think my way? It needs to be, okay, here's the objective. How can we collectively think about this and step back almost from a reverse engineering thought process and get everybody collectively to weigh in? I think one of the keys to success is you have to have a workforce, and particularly your leaders, that are engaged and inspired. They are not going to be engaged and inspired if you are not asking them to join in the conversation. You're not asking them to come up with ideas and then holding them accountable. So it can't be just a one-way communication.
So that's great, and thank you for sharing that from a standpoint of attracting and retaining the top talent to your teams. And to take that a little bit further, when we talk about selection and interviewing, for you being the top of your organization, top of your division, candidates that interview with you go through multiple rounds of assessments and interviews with different teams. And when they sit down with you, I'm curious, can you give us an insight into an interview with Melissa? What does that look like? What types of questions are you asking, to the extent that you can share that with us? And more importantly, what do you look for in some of the responses when you talk to the candidates?
Yeah, so I think when you interview someone, it does need to be conversational versus me asking a number of questions, them asking a number of questions. I think it has to be conversational. I'm looking for somebody who is very interested, obviously, in the opportunity. I'm looking for someone who's done their homework, who understands the organization, to the degree they can, the business, the products we offer. They need to come to the table with some insight about potentially ideas of how to grow the business. And it doesn't matter what level, what role you're in, everybody can add value into driving growth. I also think the person needs to have done their homework around the culture. I think the culture is important. And for that person to understand, is it a culture that they want to work in, or do they have ideas about how to change the culture? I also am looking for someone who has a strong appetite for learning, who can say, look, I'm not maybe familiar with all areas of the business. Here's what I do know. Here's what I need to learn. I also think they need to come with a set of questions, and maybe a couple of questions would be, so how have people excelled in this role in the past? What would you like to see that's different as far as outcomes out of this role? How do you measure success? And so I think they need to come with some thoughtful questions as well, because you want to make sure that it's a fit. If they decide to take the role, if they're offered the opportunity, that it's a fit between the person taking the role and the company that they're working for. I've said this before, and I think others have said it also, is that people don't leave a company per se. They leave their boss, their supervisor. And so it's important that, both sides feel comfortable going forward with the relationship. But I think people who are curious, who ask questions, who have done their homework, who have some ideas, and then also kind of set expectations about what they're looking for out of the job. They should be interviewing me just as much as I'm interviewing them.
Oh, those are great insights. And from a standpoint, I love that you mentioned that it's a conversation at the end of the day. It's an opportunity for both sides to make that assessment. And a lot of times when other executives that either we reach out to, or they reach out to us to participate on the podcast, some questions that we feel that around what's in it for me as an executive. But in my point of view, for you as an executive to participate in a short conversation like this, it also provides an opportunity for any prospect candidates or people that are looking into your organization to get at least high level understanding of who is the leader of that particular division or organization. And I've gotten so many comments from a lot of the executives that I've hosted in the past, that in some of the interviews, to the point that you were talking about doing the homework, looking at the past speaking engagements, or looking at the past, conferences where the leader participated. What have they talked about? What is their communication style? I think a lot of those things really matter for any candidate that actually joins a particular company and sees who is at the top. Because like you said, people don't leave the company, they leave the boss that they had. So that's a great analogy. And I appreciate the insight into kind of how you structure your conversations with your prospective candidate. That's very interesting. What's your take on retention? Because these days, with companies shifting to remote, everyone thought that, oh, great, now I'm gonna get this great opportunity to tap into talent, throughout the world, where I didn't necessarily have that access before, when we were constrained within our physical location of the office. But also on the other spectrum, the competition increased 10x from other companies, probably much bigger or much faster, or their ability to offer maybe something more than your organization to tap into the same talent. So
Yeah.
retention becomes a big challenge, big focus for a lot of companies. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a couple of things you have to think about. I think first of all, you have to make sure that your company, organization has a purpose. And people will talk about this, but I think it's important. You have to be explaining the why, like why the company they're working for is well suited for them. What's the vision and the purpose, and hopefully it aligns with who they are, their values, and what they're striving to do. I also think you have to try to know people individually, and I know that's hard across big companies, but it's important that you have a relationship with people on your team. You possibly know their kids' names. You know what they're interested in. You have to invest in people. You just have to take the time to pick up the phone, make the phone calls. When people are promoted, or when they get a new job, pick up the phone and say congratulations. Email maybe is easier, but I think it's taking some of those extra steps to make it sure you have personalized conversations with people. Because look, everybody's different, but for me, I will work as hard as I can and be as committed as I am if I have somebody who I think supports me and has my back. And so that's been my motto with my team all the time. I have your back. I am here for you. And I truly believe that. My responsibility is to help them grow. And I think every leader, particularly if you're in management and you have a team, your job is to help your team grow and be inspired and engaged. And if you're not up for doing that, then maybe you shouldn't be in a leadership role, because it's so critical. But I think it gets down to people have to believe in something bigger than themselves. And they have to believe that the work that they're doing, that they come to work each and every day and sacrifice time with their family, with their friends for a job. They have to believe that it's purposeful, filled for them, and it makes sense, and that there's an outcome that they're going to be excited about, which is why I think communication is so important. I tell people, if you're a leader, you're supposed to get out behind that computer or that PC, pick up a microphone, get in front of people and talk to them. Because you can't assume that people know the objectives of the company, what is going on every day, and how we're executing against those objectives. You have to communicate. And so for some people, that's not very comfortable. And it's not something that you necessarily are born with, but something you have to practice. And I think that's really important to engage your employees and get them behind the objectives of the company and to stay.
Right, absolutely. No, that's very powerful in the sense that authentic communication, that even if you don't necessarily have the skills, but communicating from authentic standpoint, and also showing genuine care, like you were talking about, that it's not just because I'm in a leadership position and I almost have to do that, but expressing that genuine care for your coworkers, your peers, your organization. I think that goes very far and oftentimes overlooked. So that's very powerful. And Melissa, in conclusion, the last part of the episode, I like to focus a little bit more on your content diet, as I like to call that. What are some of the sources that you consume on daily basis that help you stay ahead of the game from a self-actualization perspective or self-learning? Share with us any of those resources.
Oh, sure. So, one of the first thing I do in the morning after I get my coffee, or really my Diet Coke that I like to drink, my caffeine fix, I start reading newspapers. I go through the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. I look at technology articles, and so I enjoy reading. And I think it's important. I think it's great that we all have technology that generally we have access to, that we can learn. And so doing a lot of reading, articles, industry articles are important. I also enjoy reading books. And so leadership books in particular. I think that the way in which people work is changing so quickly, and where people live and how they interact. And so leadership is changing. It's one thing to say that you're a leader and you understand the dysfunctions or the benefits of a team, and you work hard to make sure you've got a high performing team. But I think also the way in which you communicate can change over time. And what a good leader is and the characteristics of a good leader will change over time. And so I enjoy reading leadership books, and then really talking with people. I think everybody should step back and think about who are the top 10 to 15 people in their industry, some of the smartest people, and try to go talk to them or exchange emails with them or read their blogs, read their articles, read the books they publish, because you can learn a lot from those interactions.
I love that, especially the last part, because that's at the end of the day what I do. I initially started out when during my time at Harvard, I was talking to one of my professors in terms of how do I expand my network? How do I build that, that circle of trusted mentors and peers in the industry? And he mentioned that he actually had his own podcast that he interviewed, people that he looked up to. And I thought there's nobody higher than him. And so that kind of just started as an experiment. But at the end of the day, it's also very powerful surrounding yourself, your network, and investing into that. Having these conversations is very great source of learning. And last but not least, what is your favorite book, or what are you currently reading? And maybe there's a book that you always recommend to others, and why is that?
Okay, so I actually have two books. One is called The Happiness Advantage. I want to make sure, by Sean Aker. And the premise of this book is that the harder you work, the more successful you'll be, therefore, the happier you will be. And it's a fallacy. That's flawed. I mean, happiness is not about thinking, okay, if I would get this next promotion or get this next job opportunity, or if I could just save this much in my account, then I'm going to be happy. It's really happiness within, and everybody defines that differently. But for me, that's been important because I will always set my sight on what are the next goals and objectives. And I just have to remember that's important and it's interesting. And I think intellectually it challenges you, but it may not be what drives happiness. The other book is Start with the Why by Simon Sinek. And this is all about what I mentioned earlier. You have to tell people not what we need to achieve, but why you need to achieve, because that is what inspires employees. And to me, at the end of the day, if you have an inspired workforce, they will work harder for you than anybody else. So those are just a couple of books I enjoy.
Those are great recommendations, and thank you for those. And for our listeners and viewers, we'll make those available in the episode notes. Melissa, can't thank you enough for your time today. It was very short and very insightful conversation. At least for me, I learned quite a bit. Definitely gonna stay in touch with you. Perhaps we're gonna do another episode in a year or so and see how much have changed, transpired. And I'm definitely looking forward to that.
That'd be great. Thank you.